Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Thank you for joining me for folks' favorite Fandom Friday. Now, every Friday, I get the chance to visit with somebody from the wider world of the Tolkien fandom. Writers, musicians, artists, craftsmen, scholars, content creators, and more. And today we're welcoming another podcaster to Fandom Friday. You see, we've had one Tolkien With Friends co-host, yes. What about second Tolkien With Friends co-host? But in case you didn't know about that, Pip, let me welcome this week's guest to today's Tolkien Times. Andie, thank you for joining me.
Hi, we're so happy to be here.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, first, since you've not been on either show, I'm going to ask you the question I ask everyone who comes on the Prancing Pony podcast or today's Tolkien Times. How and when did you first encounter Middle-earth? And what is it about Tolkien's works that keeps you coming back?
That's a great question. I've talked a little bit about my story in other places, but it's really one of those things where I was a voracious reader as a kid, and the movies had been announced at some point. I was probably like 10 or 11, and my mom came to me, and we didn't really read books together anymore. I was like, knees deep in Harry Potter, but she, as for example, where I was, fandom wise. And my mom was like, hey, I've never read these before. I really want to read them before the movies come out. Do you want to do it together?
Oh.
And so we read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And actually the set that we had was a movie tie-in set. So it had, like Viggo and Frodo and
Nice.
I think Christopher Lee, or I called Elijah Wood Frodo. You can see how much these have been a part of my life. They are one and the same. So they were the movie tie-ins, and we read them together, and we actually read all three, excluding The Hobbit. We did read that, but we read all of them before Fellowship came out.
Oh, wow.
In, what was it, 2001?
Yeah, 2001, correct.
Yeah. So, we were like ready to go with that story.
Cool.
And as far as what keeps me coming back, I think it's been I feel like that was a super formative time of my life, right? I was introduced to it, and it's one that really sparked my imagination in ways that others hadn't. I tried to kind of write my own version. It was not quite up to like, I wasn't like creating a language, but I did have like little Hobbit characters and like a Smeagol character that wasn't quite like baby eating Smeagol, more like a cute, friendly version. And so it was one of those that I think came in at a really formative part of my life and kind of probably changed my DNA a little bit. And it's one of those where even when I would get into something else, or I was busy with school or life, it was one that it was so easy to come back to. And every single time I reread Lord of the Rings, I found something new in it, something that resonated with me differently now that I was older, or something that I'd forgotten about. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. So it's just been one that has grown with me, I would say. And it's kind of a comfort read at this point, not to mention the movies and all of that. So.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying about getting something new out of the books every single time you read them. I'm blown away at the fact that I've been reading them for, I don't even want to say 40 years, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 years. And even now, as I'm doing the podcast, every single episode, I'm opening the books and discovering more. So yeah, definitely keeps me coming back too. So as another podcaster, I'm always very interested in what got you started in doing this. Tell us the story of the genesis of Tolkien with Friends. What made you think about doing a podcast? And then what led you to choose the approach that you did?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a weird answer. Maybe not in these times, but I joined TikTok kind of as not ever intending to make videos, but I kind of knew how the algorithm worked. And so I was very like, what do I want to see? And at the time, I think I had just started rereading the books again during the pandemic. And so I was just like, hashtag LOTR, like hashtag Middle Earth. And so I wanted my For You page to look a certain way. And so I started seeing a few folks that were already creating videos. And I was like, I have something to say about that. I could maybe add to this or find some other people that are interested in the same thing as me. So then I started making videos, primarily comparing the books and the movies, because I was kind of just doing that anyway. A big series that I did at first was lines from Lord of the Rings I wish that had been in the movies. That was like
wow.
the
Give
thing.
100 of those. Yeah.
So many. And there would be ones where it would be like, if I could just take one, knowing the time constraints of a film.
Yeah.
If there was one thing that I could snag from the books that I don't think would add runtime, that I don't think you wouldn't have to change anything else, but it would just give so much more to a scene, in my opinion. Yeah. So I started there. And then I was like, I actually have a lot more to say about this than what I could fit into 3 minutes or whatever. So I started exploring the idea of the podcast from that lens, which led me down a rabbit hole of, okay, what podcast already exists?
Mm-hmm.
And, I was kind of blown away by how many there were. There are a ton. And I was like, do we need another one? And then I was like, well, there actually aren't. There's so many that are hosted almost exclusively by guys. And
fair.
There were a couple that weren't. And I was like, you know what? One more couldn't hurt.
Right.
So it actually started out me, and I was, hadn't really planned that much into it. And my best friend, Anna, who's more of a Game of Thrones fan, said, hey, I could do this with you if you wanted.
Oh,
and so I was like, you know what? Why not? So I think that really helped us in the early days about thinking of what is it that I really want Anna to know, and that kind of also inspired the name of Tolkien with Friends, because we played with some other ideas, but ultimately I wanted to try to capture those kind of moments that you have when it's just you and your bestie and you don't really care who's listening. You kind of go off on tangents. You're silly, but then you can switch back to kind of being serious, because you're not really worried about.
I know nothing of this whatsoever. I don't know what you mean about tangents and digressions. Nothing.
Neither do I.
Of course. We're professionals.
So it started off with me and Anna, and I think we, it took us a few episodes when we got into our groove, but then, and she was also pregnant at the time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so she was like, I will give you until August, or I will do this regularly until August. And I was like, or July. And I was like, okay, cool. But I want one of my girls, to do this thing with me. So I reached out to Callie, who she had been a guest kind of early days. She was Flight to the Ford. Okay. And we had kind of just become really good friends after that. And I was like, Callie, I would love you to do this with me. And she said, absolutely. And I think around the same time, she was also doing the Voices of Artist stuff with Nubetta. So she was, really going in on the podcasting. And I was trying to, keep season 1 afloat. And but I think that we have a really fun dynamic, and it's just one of those things where it's just an excuse to hang out, really, at this point.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I really like about your show and your TikTok videos as well is how it's not only that you avoid acting like a gatekeeper. I think it's kind of minimal work to avoid doing that, but you seem to intentionally embrace the role of being a gate opener, right? You really do look to bring in fans to the Tolkien community and actively make it a welcoming place. Talk to us a bit about what drives you to do that.
Yeah. As far as, I think that there is so much thinking about the types of people that we see in the space. And it is so often really driven by white men. And not that that's a bad thing.
I know.
Not that it's bad to have, but I think the problem is the proportions.
Yes.
Right? So so with that, I wanted to not only, bring in more women, but also more women of color and, non-binary folks, and just really kind of make an effort to illustrate how diverse this fandom really is. So and also a lot of these people were already my friend, TikTok mutuals and all of that, or, friends in real life, friends from Discord. And so, again, it gave us a chance to hang out, but it also gave us an opportunity to make sure that we weren't kind of falling into what's kind of the default in the fandom. And I think that also trying to reframe a lot of what it means to be a Tolkien fan. And we're only like a tiny baby podcast, but as far as the voices that are getting, amplified, or the voices that you're seeing all the time, you just think about how it's especially when we think about the nature of the internet and how algorithms and social platforms, they're so prone to amplifying angry, racist, yucky stuff.
I've seen that. It is disheartening, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it really, we felt so many emotions, when we internally, like me and Callie have talked about dealing with that kind of stuff. And I know that Callie has shared in other spaces how it almost made her want to stop doing stuff on the internet, talking about Lord of the Rings openly, which is horrible, because we know that there is this bigger group that is so inclusive and welcoming.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure that those voices were being heard in some tiny way. So we really do try to, in between, I'm really trying to make new friends on the internet. So, really trying to find as many people from different corners of the community. We've had cosplayers, we've had folks that are really good at memes. We've had friends that are more into Star Wars, but they like Lord of the Rings, but they don't know as much about it. And so also thinking about how I think it's also really easy when you have a fandom that, or, a fan space that is so, there's an academic side, there is so much to wade through, it's not just movies, it's not just books.
No,
it's not just video games, it's kind of anything and everything. So I think that there is also a tendency, if you are just dipping your toe in, to call yourself not a real fan. And that's something that we also want to challenge as well, because
just the whole idea of real fan and anybody deciding who that is or is not does sort of rub me the wrong way as well. I definitely hear you there.
Yeah, I think it's something that, we can probably guess where it comes from, but as far as doing what we can to challenge that, I think that the way that we talk about these, the movies on one hand is important, and also the way we talk about the books is also important. And just recognize, do you hear Corky growling?
I do hear the dog. It's all right. The whole world
would show him
your dog now.
That's, you know what, if you've listened to Tolkien with Friends, especially season 1, he is very much a part of it, doing the exact same thing, or digging. Digging was a big thing during season 1.
I think we can live with a little bit of a dog showing up here and there. That's a great answer, by the way. I really appreciate it. I actually want to give you just one more question before we go. I know we're probably already a little long. Can you tell us a bit about the future of Tolkien with Friends? Where are you now, and where's the show headed?
Yes, so we paused for season 2. We've recorded all of season 2, but because of the nature of our first 2 seasons being comparing the Peter Jackson movies to the books, out of not only in solidarity with the writers and actors, but also any of our guests that may want or have SAG cards and that kind of thing. So we just kind of stopped on like promoting and releasing for that reason. But I think there's hope for that those will be heard and seen very soon.
I hope so. As of the publication, or I should say, as of the recording of this episode, the writer's strike has been resolved, but the actor's strike is still going. But hopefully there's some movement in the right direction.
Yeah, hopefully they get the deal that they deserve. But in the meantime, and this is something that I'm really excited about because spoiler alert, the Hobbit movies kind of bum me out.
So I hear that.
So what we're doing for our next kind of, I don't know if you want to call it season 2.5, because we started it mid season 2, and it doesn't necessarily follow the format that we have been doing, but I'm really excited because we are going to be going back to Lord of the Rings with a little bit of a twist, because we are going to be folding in things from like the history of Middle Earth and the Silmarillion.
Oh, good.
In context of, if you saw this reference in Lord of the Rings and you were like, what? And you basically have to move on a lot of the time and just be like, that was nice. That seemed important, but there's no other context. And, also knowing that Tolkien wrote it without ever really thinking that he was going to get the Silmarillion published.
He really wanted it. Yeah, he really wanted it out there. He'd been trying so desperately to get it published.
And told no.
Publisher, right? I mean, he went to Waldman at a different publisher at Collins, and he said, "Yeah, I'll take both the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion." And then he kind of changed his mind, and Tolkien went back hat in hand to Allen and Unwin and said, "Can I get the Lord of the Rings published after all?"
So it's really self-serving. It is the truth of what the next iteration will be. And talking about, because I have read the Silmarillion. I have read a lot of wiki articles about the Silmarillion. I've only really truly read it maybe like 2 times. Whereas
There's
Lord of the Rings I've reread every.
That can help you with that.
Oh, is there, Alan? What is it called?
Tolkien Professor.
So we are going to just, again, have our friends on, and kind of chat through some of those things.
Good.
Why it was maybe important, why it may have just been for funsies, and, the fun things that we learn along the way.
Well, where can people find you, follow you, and listen to you? Just a quick chance for you to plug your socials and your channels and things.
Yeah. So if you want to just hear me only, that's mainly TikTok under Andie INC. It's a very old username. Don't ask. And you can find all the Tolkien with Friends things pretty much at tolkienwithfriends.com.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where the episodes are. Our socials are linked there. But if you search that anywhere, you're going to probably come across us and or photos of Tolkien with his friends.
That's true too. Tolkien and Lewis and Dyson and all the Inklings, and good stuff. Well, folks, that is it for today's Fandom Friday, but be sure to come back next week for another Fandom Friday to meet another fellow Tolkien fan and maybe even learn what niches of the community you might be interested in exploring. And if you're interested in joining me here on today's Tolkien Times for a future Fandom Friday, let me know by emailing bartleman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. And please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we wrap up this week with Silmarillion Saturday. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow at Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.